Good evening, or morning, or afternoon, whenever you guys feel like watching this. Welcome to POLSC 2303, Introduction to International Relations. Once again, I am your Professor Wes Jamison, and obviously, since this is the third time my computer has crashed, trying to upload this awesome lecture, the lecture is just too awesome for my computer to handle. So I cut it back a little bit. So hopefully this one goes through. This is unfortunately our last week talking about international political economy, which is fairly sad to me. Today we're going to be talking about central banks. What is a central bank? Well, a central bank does not bank to you and I. It does not hold our money, but it does hold your government's money. Our central bank is called the Fed, and what they deal in is called monetary policy. And what they do is they shift the money supply around. And because they're able to shift the money supply, take money in and out of the system, they control the interest rates on that money, okay? And this is interest rates between banks, okay? They are lending to banks, okay? We're not talking about gold. We're talking about actual money. I don't know why the textbook has this particular picture for some reason, but it has nothing to do with gold. We are talking about actual money. So, we're going to talk about exchange rate regimes. The first one is a floating regime. It is currently what the United States operates in, okay? That means floating. That means that the rate that we exchange our money with is comparable to other countries, okay? But there's also a pegged rate, okay? China has this. What they do is they peg the rate of their money to ours, okay? So when we go up, they go up. There's also this idea of replacing one currency with another, okay? So El Salvador and Ecuador did this. It is called dollarization, okay? So when El Salvador and Ecuador's currency just completely hyperinflated, we talked about that last week, it got to the point where their money was worth nothing. So what they do, they just scrapped it and went with the American dollar instead, okay? So instead of using their own currency, they're using ours. So let's keep in mind we have floating, where you see our dollar has been floating up and down over time. Now, we have tried to keep this relatively stable over the last few years, but you can see there was a definite drop from 2003 to 2007, obviously because of the 2007, 2008, 2009 crash. And because of that, we see different rates across North America. Now, because most people are pegged to American dollars, we try to float it around ours, and you can see that people do float it around ours. But this is surprisingly not so for the rest of the world, or at least the other hemisphere of the world. As we look to the other side of the world, we can see that there are many different types of exchange rates used, okay? So again, we have floating, and then we have pegged, and now we have dollarization, okay? So keep in mind, that is very easily a test question. What are the three types of exchange rates that we see around the world, okay? So who favors fixed or pegged rates? Well, obviously we know China does, but investors love it because this means that the money is going to stay stable compared to one person's currency or one country's currency, or they can also peg it to the price of gold. Borrowers love this because they know exactly what the rate is going to be. Obviously, corporations love this because they are concerned about profits, and they also want to know what the rate is going to be. Now, countries concerned with inflation, obviously we remember that Germany has had some inflation problems in the past. Germany very much favors a pegged rate. Now, why does Germany care so much about inflation? Well, after World War I, the Versailles Treaty completely destroyed them, okay? They had to pay back a lot of money. And all of their citizens were still recovering from the war, so nobody was paying taxes, right? So, if we see here, January 23rd, 1 mark was worth 18,000 to 1 USD. You can see as time went on, we got to 4 trillion by November, so in 11 months, the rate had climbed exponentially. The Federal Reserve did nothing to stop this, okay? So what happened because their currency was completely out of control? Well, a popular energetic politician proposed a new currency. You may know him as Adolf Hitler, Okay, he offered what's called labor treasury certificates. This freed the country from debt. He just said, look, these are what we're going to pay you, and you're just going to have to deal with it, because they absolutely refused to pay the bills that they had due to World War I. And he started a new currency with these labor treasury certificates. This was inflation-free currency. The people absolutely thought it was the best thing in the world. Okay, so now you have a German people that are recovering from war, and they're just rallying around this guy named Hitler. Okay, but we all know what happened. Hitler lost World War II. America learned its lesson. We are no longer going to let Germany just suffer through inflation, because that's how another world war would happen. So what we do, we enact the Marshall Plan. Okay, now who favors floating rates? Okay, well, obviously labor does, because sometimes it floats in a higher direction, benefiting us. Some governments, including our government, the United States, enjoys floating rates. We are able to keep it relatively stable. Now let's talk about why some countries prefer some currency preferences to others. Okay, so we here in America like a strong currency relative to others. Why? Well, because we're a consumer nation. We like to buy things. We want a strong currency so that we're able to buy as many things as possible. But some countries like weak currencies relative to others. That's because they want to sell things. Okay, a great example of this is China. They want to make their currency as amenable as possible for those to, for some people to buy these things. I have a really cool picture here of a tugboat pushing all the things that China buys out into the ocean. Okay, so from here we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the United States and how we've changed our monetary regimes. Okay, so prior to 1870, we used specie. Now, specie is just another term for just actual gold and silver. Now, what are the problems with using actual gold and silver? First of all, you don't know if it's actual gold or if it's actual silver. It may just look like gold and silver. Also, if it is actual gold and silver, people tend to shave them down, melt them into new coins, and that way you could perhaps even double your money. Then we move to the classical gold standard, okay? Now this means that we use like money, like notes, but we say that you could always get gold with this money. So we peg a note to the price of gold. Great Britain started this in the 1820s, but the United States caught on, and we started using this until the start of World War I. Interestingly enough, from this point, in 1913, we started the institution of our central bank we call the Federal Reserve, okay? The person who started it, Woodrow Wilson, the only Ph.D. to ever become president of the United States. This is a quote-unquote independent agency and bank. I say quote-unquote independent because we really don't know how close the government is actually tied to the Federal Reserve. Now, when they started this bank back in 1913, not a lot was known about the macroeconomic system. So they absolutely bungled the 1929 stock crash. Instead of providing more money to people, they stopped all the money. They stopped money from going into the system. And this actually made the recession turn into the Great Depression. With no money lent out, businesses could not keep running. This closed a lot of businesses and a lot of people lost their jobs. So, between the wars 1914 and 1944, we went back to floating rates. Now, this is free floating, and the reason why we did this was because the gold standard fell apart, right? The Great Depression made everybody less confident in the economy, and nobody wanted to trust one another, let alone the gold standard. So we all became floating. We were all floating amongst each other, right? And in 1933, Roosevelt did something America had never done. It abandoned the gold standard, essentially calling out all those debts. So we had debts, but we did not pay them. So after World War II, the countries of the world gathered around in a small city called Bretton Woods. And what they did was they came up with an agreement that not a lot of people agreed with, but it was enough of a consensus to get it passed. They fixed all of the world currencies to the US dollar. Now, we are talking every currency that the Allies had, every currency in Russia, Germany, everybody was fixed to the US dollar. And the US dollar was then fixed to gold. So, everybody was essentially going where United States went with their currency. Now, this made the United States dollar the international currency. The dollar could be used anywhere. And this was absolutely good for us because we were now able to sell our goods to anyone in the entire world using our dollar, okay? Which was a great thing for us. It is essentially what led the boom after the wars, not to mention we were the only ones still standing. Which leads us to JFK. Now, few interesting facts about JFK. JFK opposed free trade, okay? He did not believe that trade should just be freely given out. He believed that the United States should be taking a cut of everybody trading inside our borders, okay? He believed that industry should serve the nation, that companies should not just have runaway profits, that some sort of a capital gains tax should be levied so that the American people can reap some of those benefits. He also thought that we should develop our own energy sources, that we shouldn't be reliant upon other countries. Now, he also believed something else, something about the Federal Reserve, okay? He believed that the Federal Reserve had too much power. He believed that some of this power should be in the hands of the government. Now, keep in mind, the money in this country is all controlled by our central bank, the Federal Reserve, and it still is today. But on June 4th, 1963, he signed Executive Order 11110. That is giving the U.S. President authority to issue currency. Not the Fed, but the President. He then ordered 4 billion U.S. notes. And if you look at your dollars right now, you will see that it says Federal Reserve notes, not United States notes. He wanted to change this and give the power back to the people, not this bank. He believed that he sought to replace the Federal Reserve and give this money creation power back to the actual government, right? So the Federal Reserve is very powerful. And in November 22nd, 1963, he was assassinated. Now, I am not saying that the Federal Reserve assassinated Kennedy, but I am saying that these two facts happened almost right after each other. I'm going to let you guys make up your own mind on what happened to JFK, especially since there's new information coming out, and I hope you guys read it. Okay, back to the history. So if we look at 1973 to present, we now used a quote-unquote managed float system. Now, this happened right after Vietnam. Mr. Nixon, President Nixon, took us off the gold standard. You remember, we were still connected to gold during the Bretton Woods system, but we jumped off of that, and now we are on a completely managed float. Now, who manages this float? Why, none other than the Federal Reserve. They take money in and out of the system to make sure that we don't have too much inflation or too much deflation. Remember that when you put money in the system, inflation occurs. As you take money out of the system, deflation occurs. Now, at some times, not necessarily in this country, but it has happened in Germany and some other countries, including Brazil, currencies collapse, all right? And this happens, when this happens, you are no longer able to make credible commitments to other countries. Nobody believes in your currency, so you're not able to even get loans because governments can't pay back what they owe because they have no currency. So, and you remember what happens when this happens? We talked about it last time. There's civil unrest. There's lots of times where currencies just completely crash and the people have no idea what to do, so they absolutely go crazy and they riot, okay? This happened in Brazil, this happened in Ecuador, this happened in El Salvador. So, speculative attacks on currencies have been more frequent in recent years. Why? This is something political scientists, economists can't understand yet. We've seen this in the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s, and we just saw it again in the European crisis in 2011. Okay, guys, so I know that was a brief lecture. I have a couple essay prompts, okay? As we just learned, the Fed controls the supply of money, not the government. So my question to you guys is, should the Fed continue to have this much power over us? Should the Fed be able to control the money that is in our pockets? Now keep in mind, we do not vote for anybody in the Fed, okay? We have no say. In this democracy, we have no say what happens to our money. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Prompt number 2, maybe off topic, maybe not. But I have a question I wanted to ask you guys, and I've been wanting to ask you guys this for a while. I couldn't find the right place to do it, so here's just as good as any. Studies have shown that Americans are marrying in record low numbers. We are just not getting married anymore. As a matter of fact, this is the first time in American history that between the ages of 18 and 35, we have the absolute lowest marriage rates in our country's history. Why are we not marrying each other? I want to get your guys' opinion on this. I would, you obviously have to back it up with some kind of factual evidence, 2 academic sources. As always, I will be expecting a 1-page double-spaced MLA consistent paper emailed to me by Friday at midnight. And I hope you guys enjoyed these prompts. I hope you guys pick one that you guys really like. You guys have been doing great work, okay? Study, study, study. I'll be releasing one more video next week just to kind of prep you for the exam. Good luck, guys.